Hello, and welcome to today's NEASC Virtual Global Forum, The New Normal, Updates from a Reopened School. We want to begin by expressing our thanks to our panelists from the Frankfurt International School in Germany for joining us today, especially at such a busy time of the year. Congratulations to their 2020 graduates. The unique graduation ceremony, was just held this past Friday. I'm Jeff Bradley, the Director of the Commission on International Education at the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. We work with schools in more than 80 countries around the world. We're pleased to welcome you among 1,200 attendees from over 60 countries attending this morning's virtual global forum, afternoon or evening, depending where you're connecting from. Thank you to all who have submitted questions for this forum today. They were helpful in helping us frame questions for our participants. And though we won't have time to get to all of our questions, we will do our best to cover some of the main themes that came in through those questions submitted. And feel free to submit questions during the session itself. This webinar, like our past webinars, we will activate the Q&A feature where you can post your questions, and we'll do our best to get to those. You can also say hello to your colleagues around the world through the chat feature. We've created the hashtag NEASC Forum, and we ask you to use that hashtag NEASC Forum when communicating about today's forum on social media. Remember to click on the thumbs up icon for questions that you see being asked that you feel particularly strongly about and would like to see asked, and we'll try our best to get those in before the hour is over. This morning, we're joined by members of the Frankfurt International School FIS community, including students, teachers, and administrators. We'll have them introduce themselves in just a minute, but first I want to share some information on the school itself to give you a bit of context for today's conversation. Frankfurt International School has two campuses. The main campus is located in Oberursel, just outside of downtown Frankfurt. It's a large urban campus which houses a primary, elementary, and upper school in 3 buildings. Total enrollment for all of FIS is 1,850 students, and about 1,600 of those attend that main campus. Wiesbaden is the other campus. It's a smaller suburban campus which serves students from age 3 to 8th grade. It houses 1 building and has about 220 students. FIS, they began a gradual reopening of both campuses in early May, more than a month ago. Reopening started by welcoming the upper grades first, then gradually bringing back the lower grades. On May 4th, grade 11 students returned to the main campus. 2 weeks later, during the week of May 18th, grades 5, 9, and 10 students returned to the main campus, and grades 6 and 8 returned to Wiesbaden. The following week on May 25th, grades 4 and 8 returned to the main campus, and grades 4 and 5 returned to Wiesbaden. The primary students through grade 3 started their return to both campuses last week, and we'll hear more about that shortly. So obviously a lot has changed in the school's daily routine as they've implemented new safety standards in response to the global pandemic. To give you a feeling for how that looks a few weeks into the process, we'd like to show a short collection of images that FIS has kindly sent us to share with you today. And they'll All right, thank you. So you see some images. I think a lot of us around the world are wondering, what is school going to look like when we go back? And again, thanks to Frankfurt for giving us some of those visual images of what it might look like in some of our spaces around school. But we also want to hear from those who are involved in that reopening. So let me turn it over to my colleague, Trillium Hiblin, who is the Associate Director of the Commission on International Education. She'll be leading the discussion today with our panelists, and I'll keep an eye on the Q&A, and we'll come back in toward the end. So Trillium, handing it over to you to start the introductions.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And thank you all of our panelists for being here to share your experiences. Could we start with a brief introduction? Could you just let us know who you are and what you do at the school, what your role is? Paul, I'd like you to start if you don't mind. Oh, you're on mute.
My name is Paul Fochtman. I'm the head of school here at Frankfurt International School and one of the proud graduate parents who had graduation last Friday.
Thank you. Grace?
Hi everyone, I'm Grace McCallum and I'm the elementary school principal here at Frankfurt International School.
Thank you. Yolanda?
Hi, my name is Yolanda Murphy-Barrena and I have the pleasure of being the guest principal at the Wiesbaden campus.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Ralf and I teach English and Humanities here at FIS as well as an online course for Global Online Academy.
Fantastic. John, over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name's John Switzer, and I have the privilege of being the upper school principal, grades 6 through 12 here in the main campus.
Great, thank you. Anna.
Hello, I'm Anna, and I'm an 8th grader at the Wiesbaden campus.
And Michael.
Hello, my name is Michael Kraus, and I'm an 11th grader at the main campus in Oberursel.
Great, thanks to you all. Paul, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you because I know you are not going to be able to stay with us for the entire hour. You sat in on a panel for us about a month ago, just after you had opened the first few grades. Would you like to just say a few words about some things that have been learned from your perspective in the first few, the weeks that followed our last conversation? Mm-hmm. Follow up on that?
Sure, I think I'd kind of focus on 3 things. I think the first one is that, I think schools think of this as a whole, a one school thing. And you need to think that way from some perspective, but what we've learned is that there are so many different little stories that make this all work. As John and I sat out in the front of the upper school today, the person putting the sanitizing gel on kids' hands coming in, that's a reminder that the kids need to do. And we learned that from earlier in the week. So what we're just finding is that, first of all, there's a bunch of little stories that make the whole story. And then secondly, everything you do, you're doing 2 things. You're learning from, we had our first assembly, 12th grade came back and we said, that worked, that didn't. So the next time we got a group of kids together, we did things different. So each day you're gonna learn something. And then I guess the final thing I'd say is it's really about, there's no way you're gonna ensure 100% safety of everything. And I know everybody wants that, but it's really about taking all the little steps to say, if we do this, we reduce risk. If we do this, we reduce risk more. And it's about that risk management. So it continues to be a learning process. And each day we're doing a better and better job. And I couldn't be prouder of the faculty, staff, and our students who've been phenomenal.
That's great, thank you. Okay, the first thing that I'd like to ask about was a question that we heard quite a bit from our attendees beforehand, which is, with all of this social distancing and procedures and health and safety, how do you make your school still feel warm and welcoming as it was before, or in a new way? What are some of the techniques that you've used, and how does that feel? Go ahead, Grace.
In the elementary school, what we learned through this process was that was going to be key in making our students feel happy coming to school. And there was a lot of anxiety that we'd heard some of our students were feeling and that our parents were feeling about sending their students back. So a lot of what we did to make our school feel warm and welcoming happened before students even came onto campus. So it was really about thinking outside the box in our communication, and doing things that maybe we hadn't done before in our communications, like sending videos just to kids or really targeted at students to say, hey guys, you're going to be coming back to school. We can't wait to see you. We've missed you so much. Here's what your new classroom looks like. It looks a little bit differently than it did before. Or here are some ways that we can greet each other. You know, we know that you guys are big huggers, but when you come back, there's going to be air hugs, and air high fives, and elbow bumps, and showing them photos of what it might look like in the washrooms now and how they were supposed to use those, and showing them videos about what it would look like when they got out of their parents' car and how they were going to cross the street and where they were going to line up. And just using a lot of visuals for the elementary school was really helpful in our experience, and making sure that when kids came back, that sense of nervousness or anxiety about what does our new normal look like had already been addressed. So that when they did come in, there wasn't that shock of, oh my goodness, this is so different. It was, I feel prepared for this. My teacher's excited to see me. I've gotten videos from my principal. I've gotten videos from my teacher, and I'm ready to go. That was really important for our young learners.
That's great. Anna, I see you shaking your head. Would you like to talk about what it felt like to be welcomed back?
Well, it was definitely interesting. We still have some students who have chosen to stay at home. And I think my teachers have done a really amazing job at making sure we all stay in touch. So we have a Zoom meeting running with people at home, and we're still in touch with everyone at school. So it sort of helps with the feeling of isolation that's very easy to get stuck in right now. Definitely communication is one of the most important things when you're trying to make it feel more warm and welcoming.
That's really helpful. Go ahead, Michael. Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, so one thing that was repeated by Mr. Switzer multiple times is that we are not socially distancing, we are physically distancing ourselves, and we're really trying to maximize the amount of communication we have with our friends. And there was really a lot of effort put into that we are able to communicate and really be close to our friends as much as possible. And that was one of the things that really, I think FIS has excelled in. It's that we were still able to remain in social contact, but not in physical contact to avoid spreading the virus.
Excellent. Yolanda, did I see your hand up there at the same time?
Sure. No, thank you, students, for sharing that. I think the other piece is that a lot of work, particularly with the younger children, is needed, as Grace mentioned, but also with adults and anyone of any age coming back, with the whole difference of communication with masks on. The fact that you can't see the person's facial expression, you're not sure what the intent of a comment might have been because the nonverbals are missing that people are used to. So we did spend quite a bit of time, even with the little children, talking about how we communicate with each other needs to change a little bit verbally because of the fact we can't see each other's mouths anymore. And we used emojis and things like that to talk about, you know, how we can help people know if we're happy or if we're joking, areas like that. But otherwise, I think also the nice thing a lot of teachers did, particularly in the lower grades, because we have our 3- and 4-year-olds back on campus as well, was they started using their masks in the Zoom meetings and talking about their face shields and showing children at least 2 weeks before they came back. So when kids got off the bus or their parent dropped them off, they had seen their teacher and what their classmates already looked like in a mask, so they weren't afraid. So it was really done well as far as kind of scaffolding children to understand that what this new normal would look like when they actually got there in person. And I have to say it was amazing the number of, we didn't have a single 3- or 4-year-old yesterday was their first day back that didn't just walk right into campus. They felt very confident and comfortable even with their teacher in a mask.
That's a really helpful tip. I love that idea about practicing with the masks on Zoom. Yeah, Kathleen, what does it feel like in your classroom?
Well, I think one of the things we tried to really do, especially with the middle school, because those kids had been at home a lot longer than the older kids had been. But we started to notice that kids were getting quieter and quieter even in our small group Zoom conversations, that they're so used to being on mute and not having to be, you know, really there. That one of the things we tried to do the first couple of days that the middle school kids were back was to make sure that they were unmuted, and we would do activities so that they were loud and somewhat obnoxious. And it was good. And, you know, it's like doing Kahoots and doing games to sort of get them out of that, like, I can just sit here and be quiet. And I think too, trying to make sure that even though we might be doing a hybrid where kids are Zooming in and kids are in class at the same time, but trying to make sure that we plan for those interactions across students that are sitting in class and at home as well. I think that's really important, so it doesn't become two separate classes, but trying to balance that out. But I would say, just like, if you, especially for older kids, I think when you already have like those positive relationships with kids, it was just, everyone was just excited to be back. And once I think one thing to clarify too is that when our kids, once we're seated, we can take our masks off. So I'm not teaching from the front of the room behind my mask, all muffled. That once everyone's seated and we're in place, then, but if we're moving around, if a teacher is moving around the room, they need to have their mask on. So.
Go ahead, John. Thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did early on, even before the lockdown, is we had produced some videos that the students had made. So we have a really great media team, which helped. We had cameras around and screens around showing people about washing your hands and good reminders. So then when we were on lockdown and when students were planning on returning, we then created more videos, and we used the students to make the videos, which I think is also really powerful. So the students wearing masks, and you try and make light of it. We had it was set in kind of an older film style. And it was just really a positive thing for kids to visually see, okay, what does this look like? When do I wear my mask? When should I do this? When should I do that? And I think those gradual and constant reminders around the school help reinforce the things that you're doing, because you can't be everywhere at once. And so we have a lot of posters, a lot of advertising, but some of these ongoing things that the kids were part of co-creating, I think also played a role in it. And as Paul said too, it's having the nurse out front with the the spray, the disinfectant when you walk in. It's just another reminder that we're all in this together. And I think if we take that collective voice in bringing everybody back, and then there's this sort of feeling like, okay, I know what I'm doing and I want to do this well. And we started with the 11th grade and moved down, and that also helped, I think, by having the older students be somewhat role models for the younger students. So all along the way, everything was really planned, and we could check and constantly rewind the tape if we needed to change things. So I think the communication was really powerful, and getting the student involvement and the whole community as part of it was part of the success.
Great. That makes me actually want to, do you mind, Grace, if I just ask a follow-up, because it might come to what you were going to say potentially, is about compliance with all of these rules and regulations. How compliant are people, and from the students' perspectives, after you speak, Grace, do your friends actually follow all these rules when nobody's looking?
Well, let's put that to the students. Michael.
You want to do that one first? Michael, what's the real deal?
So I think generally students follow rules really well, and I really don't think that any students intentionally don't follow the rules. I think sometimes, or basically all the times, when students don't follow the rules 100%, it probably is due to them being in this habit of, oh, back in the old days, this is how we used to do it, and just not remembering that things have changed. So that is the only real reason that I think students might not follow the rules perfectly. But I think on the large, students really follow the rules very well. And I really have to say, a lot of the guidelines that FIS has implemented made it very easy to follow, and it reduced confusion and really allowed students to do what they're supposed to do and not get closer than 1.5 meters.
Great. Grace, what does that look like in the elementary school on your campus in terms of following the rules?
Well, I would say that, for our elementary school students, they're still young enough that they really want to please us. That makes it a little easier. But also, when I talked a little bit about the anxiety of some students to come back to school, a lot of it was surrounding those rules. And they were really nervous about, what happens if I accidentally break a rule, or if I accidentally break into someone's 1.5 meter bubble, or my mask breaks, or my mask falls off. And so for us, it was really about reassuring them that we know this is new. We're here to coach them. We're here to help. We're here to give reminders, but that we do take it really seriously. And that if any students, were doing it on purpose to break those safety regulations, that would be a serious problem. But we haven't had any issues. I mean, every once in a while we'll have a student in a line that kind of forgets and goes a little close to their friend, but they're wearing masks when they're not seated in their classroom, and it's been fine. One thing we were a little bit concerned about was some of our students who have some special needs that might make it more challenging for them to follow those rules, but they've really done a great job as well. And we've used our support staff to help to coach all of our students, and so far so good.
Michael, you had your hand up.
Yeah, also, and there's one thing that really helps out a lot, because obviously staff cannot be everywhere. One thing that really students have been doing a lot is if someone doesn't follow the rules, students say, hey, you're not 1.5 meters apart. It's really not just an effort that the teachers are supposed to enforce the rules, but at a certain point, this really becomes a habit, and students then also say, hey, come on, you're too close. So really, after a while, students really jump on this train and help out as much as they can.
Wow, hearing that makes me really hopeful for the entire world, actually, Michael. So thank you for sharing that. Yolanda, I think you were next.
Actually, I'd like to defer to Anna, hear the students first, and then I'll fill in.
Okay.
So kids at my school generally do follow the rules, though it is a bit difficult to remember at times. I think one of the issues that actually my friend brought up to me was that over time, as we've been back, the longer we've been back, the more relaxed we sort of feel, which can be good. I mean, it's great if we feel relaxed, but we stop taking into account how serious this actually is. So I think that sometimes we will need a reminder of that because we just get too comfortable.
That's really thoughtful. Yeah. Yolanda, what's it look like with the youngest kids? I'm curious about.
Yeah, I was going to say on our campus, it's different because we have 3-year-olds all the way up through 8th grade. And of course, there's very different regulations depending on the age group. So one of the things that we did to help is that the school is kind of zoned. So the middle school students are in one part of the building, elementary's in another, and we keep the first steps primary down through grade 1 in one other area. And they're kind of in these bubbles, and they really don't cross at all during the day. So even if you do have a couple students who may forget, the exposure is minimized by keeping these bubbles in place, just through scheduling and traffic flow. And then the other thing is just what Anna mentioned is just there's reminders done out pretty regularly with faculty, staff, and parents and students about what the different age groups are required to do also, because you're not always sure if you see a student, if they're a first grader or if they're a primary student, for example, it's a difference between having to wear a mask and not having to wear a mask. So there is quite a bit of ownership, I think, with the students also, that now when they walk in, they tell us what grade they're in when they're coming on campus because they know they're going to get asked. Because it also impacts, is their temperature taken at the door or is it taken in the classroom? And they adapt so quickly. But that would be one of my tips, is that if you do have multi-age groups, that you do some things through traffic and through building zoning to help people know that if you're in this area, these are the rules that apply to the students in this part of the school.
Yeah, that's helpful. I guess what I would like to know is, if you've had about 4 or 5 weeks in some grade levels, especially John in your area where you started with the upper school first, what are some procedures or structures that you started with that you quickly realized that's not going to work and we need to adjust?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it speaks to a lot of the reopening and return is doing a lot of surveys and getting feedback really quickly. So, we tried something for a few days, then we survey the kids, get something out to the teachers, get something out to the parents, how's it felt? What are some of the things? And then you can look at how we would do it differently. And even with it, when we were on all distance learning, one of the things that we realized, and I'm sure many schools that are watching felt this, is the students felt a bit overloaded by the end of the day. They're zoomed out, if you like. And one of the things that we moved on was we introduced a study hall. So the last period of the day became an opportunity for students to catch up on the work that they maybe had been given over the day, or just even a break from the screen. And so this study hall became something that they really appreciated after a while. And so when we reintroduced the students, we started with the 11th grade. And when they were back on campus, we didn't need to have the study hall, but we kept it for the students who were offsite. And so it just sort of, that was a thing that we gradually brought back when all students, and now all students are back. We did that. The other big thing would be, we started with all the 11th graders, and I've seen in some of the chats the question about, did you start with everybody, or how did you get half of the group back? We started in grade 11 with everybody coming back, and to make the social distance work, we had spillover classrooms, often right beside the original classroom. So the teacher would have to be balancing both, and we hired substitute teachers to come in and monitor the parallel class. With the next wave coming back, we couldn't afford to have all those rooms available. So we ended up having students coming in for one day, and then another group of students would come in the second day. So if you like, half of all the grade 9s and 10s would come in on Monday, and then the other half would come in on Tuesday. And that became an interesting thing because, and I'm sure Kathleen could speak to this, now you have, and Michael, we have students who are on Zoom at home using the distance learning plan that we prepared, plus students face-to-face. And so that added a whole complexity to the pedagogy and the way you have to teach when you've got a class in front of you and a class away, knowing that you're going to see the other group the next day. And so that's another thing that we've still been working on. How do we get that right? And how can we then change? The other thing that we added a lot to do with advertising, if you like. So masks, we realized that some places people weren't wearing them as much as other places. So we had to add more signage and put more adults around. We brought in some substitute teachers who could monitor areas that we knew were high traffic areas and where we saw the students maybe weren't following as many of the rules. So those are some of the things.
Great. Let's dig in a little bit to what you just said, John, about this having side-by-side room and Zoom, as they call it, right? You've got some in the room, some on Zoom. And people are asking in the chat how many of your students are actually working from home still. You know, for example, Kathleen, in some of the classes that you teach, are we talking about a handful? Are we talking about half? How many students are away? And then how do you manage the multiple locations where learning is happening?
It's difficult. And depending on the size of the class, so I have 2 6th grade classes that are already at 14. So, but because of the way we've separated them by the house system, so 4 houses come in one day and 4 houses come in the next, which was a great way to immediately go, okay, we can completely differentiate, which, you know, like split the whole school in half in a way. But in my class, it just happens to be that on one day I have 3 students in class, and on another day I'll have 10 students in class. So, and then we have students who have opted because of high-risk parents or family members that they're staying home. The other challenge is that some of the older kids are choosing to stay home. So some days they're in on the day they're supposed to be, and some day they're Zooming in. So they're not, it's not that they're absent from the course, it's just it's hard to know when kids are going to be in and when kids are going to be home as far as being able to plan for those interactions in the face-to-face classroom. But it has been,
sorry to interrupt. Are the students in different places working on the same work? So if they're working from home versus being in school, are they working on the same work? And I guess, yes, you know, are they working off of the same script template of what the work is?
Yes, I don't have 2 separate lesson plans at this point. I tried to keep them moving forward so that you know, we meet in Zoom at the beginning of the class. I'll go over the directions and then we carry on from there. And the students that are in class, we might be able to have a little bit more discussion on those days. And then I try to repeat that discussion so that when the kids come in the next day, that they get the benefit of having that discussion as well. But for example, like with my 7th grade class the other day, we had a press conference. And so some students were acting out historical figures and some students were press, they were investigative reporters, and that was all done through Zoom, even though some of us were sitting in the classroom together and some people were at home. So it's just being creative with like how you can get them talking and interacting in 2 separate places or 30 different places.
Michael and Anna, I'm curious, does it feel like you're one class with the people who are Zooming in? Michael, you can go ahead to get your hand up.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure this is different for Anna because for my grade level, at least, the entire grade was being brought back and we were not split in half. So I would say roughly 90% of people actually intend to be back. So that is the number of people that will be on campus. But I do think that the students being at home, they really feel like they're still part of the class because we, at FIS, it's a culture where you're not kind of by yourself and you have to learn everything by yourself, but it's really a collaborative space. So kind of those connections that you had before we went into lockdown and before we have this room and Zoom hybrid, they really persist. And the students that are at home, it's like people will check in on them and say, hey, did you do the math thing? Can you explain it to me? I don't understand it. So there's really this kind of, team spirit that we have that really, I think, shines through in a lot of classes and a lot of situations. But of course, there's situations in which it's not really as possible. But what a lot of teachers, or what one teacher specifically has done, which I found was very good for this entire hybrid system was a screencast system in which he recorded himself presenting a presentation, which he then sent out via Google Drive. So students at home could have the exact same experience as students in class. It's just the added benefit of if you were in class, you could ask the teacher in person, and if you're home, you could ask the teacher over Zoom. So that's kind of one of the things that I found was best. But generally, I think there's really still this, or for now, there's still this very strong team spirit that we have.
Thank you, Michael. And Anna, what about for you? Because your grade level was split, right?
Our grade level is split, but it's optional. Many students prefer to stay home because that's just how they prefer to learn. It still feels like they're very much a part of our class. Our teachers often leave their Zoom on and leave it so that we can see them and they can see us. We continue with our class discussions each time, and oftentimes we'll have a discussion during class at the beginning, and then in the middle we all sign off to do our own work. And then in the end, we'll come back together, discuss what we've done. So it's really the same as it's always been. It's just on a different platform.
Great. So it sounds like you're able to collaborate with your peers, either in the physical space with the distancing or across Zoom. So from a teaching and leading perspective, for the rest of you, what is it like to try to continue with collaborative work, for example? Is it possible in a room where they're spaced 6 feet apart? Are they yelling at each other across the room? Are they still using digital collaborative tools? How are you making that work? Grace?
I would say in our lower elementary school classrooms, for example, grade 2, in our grade 2 section, we only have 5 students who are not on campus, and they're zooming in to the class in live time. But it does pose a challenge at that grade level to have students who are zooming in from home collaborate in the same way as students, for example, in grade 5. In grade 4 and 5, and even in grade 3, it's working really well. But in grade 2, it's a little bit more challenging. So it's working in upper grade levels. Lower grade levels, having them zoom in, it can be a little bit different. But when they're in the classroom, I was interested to see how that was going to work out with collaborating from a distance, and it's actually been fine. They're able to do that. They've looked forward to it for a long time after being home for so long. And the teachers are just able to kind of group students at a distance in a similar way that they would have before, but rather than being at one table, they're at a few different tables. And it does get a little bit louder than maybe it would have before, but in elementary school, that's par for the course.
That's a sign of good things happening, right? Let me just ask a quick follow-up question, and then I'll go to you, Yolanda. Do you spill outside of classrooms quite often to be able to get groups working like in the hallway, or do you use your space differently to try to, yeah?
So that might be something that people are interested in hearing how we did that, because we had to be very careful and measure our classrooms and measure the square footage and find out how many we could safely fit in the classrooms. And we found that we could fit all students in the classrooms. We haven't needed spillover, and we haven't needed it for collaborative spaces either. But to make that work, we did have to kind of redesign our classrooms. So we had to take out all of our big bulky furniture like couches, chairs, bean bags, big bookshelves. All of those things had to be removed from our elementary school classrooms to make sure there was enough square footage to have students distanced appropriately. But once we did that, it worked really well. But no, we haven't had to use spillover rooms yet, and hopefully we won't have to.
Great, thanks. Yolanda, over to you.
Yeah, I was just to add on to what Grace was saying about building prep. That was one of the pieces, I think, that luckily we had several weeks leading up to when we were welcoming students back to plan, and we were able to bring faculty and TAs, for example, in to help with that, whereas I know in some countries they're not allowed to be in the building either. But so we were lucky in that we could have people come in, and I would say it took about 2 full weeks solid of removing furniture that was not allowed, anything that was, you can't sanitize, so all soft toys, books, for example, that you couldn't tuck away, those all had to be removed from the classroom so that the teachers could manage, specifically for the younger children, what things they were touching when they were in the classroom, and then what got quarantined when another class came into the room. So we actually, because PE is outlawed here currently, We've had to redo that. I was going to share a little bit about what we've done for PE and recess, but the changing rooms they can't use them. So our changing rooms right now are full of all those lovely colorful rugs that you have normally in an elementary and primary school, bean bags, couches, toys that are not able to be sanitized or washed in soapy water. They've all been removed from the classrooms, put into storage. And we even have a section of one of the changing rooms by primary that is for quarantining toys. So they can put them in there for 3 days, let them sit, and then bring them back out to play again with a different group of children. So it's really, it's a little different planet than I think what a lot of us were used to when setting up for school in the fall has been. But it's worked out really well. And actually, one of the favorite activities in the lower school here is at the end of the day, they get to go outside into the outdoor learning space, get soap and water and scrub all the toys and have a big, basically a bubble water time. So they enjoy it. They help wash everything and then it goes to dry for the next day. But lots of structural things that have to be put in place depending on the regulations in your country.
Okay, Grace, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention something. As I was hearing Yolanda talk, I thought of a detail that maybe some of our other elementary school teachers or administrators might want to know about, is when we were planning for how to design the classrooms, we really had to be thoughtful about, we're going to be asking children in grade 2, grade 3, lower elementary to come in and sit in one spot for an extended period of time. And it, works really differently. We were talking about collaboration, and whereas before we were in this crisis, students would sit together at a table or go outside into the hallway and sit close together and collaborate. We really had to think about the fact that they won't be able to get up and move around as much as they could before. So, while we could have, for example, had a classroom with 22 desks in it, we knew that asking a child in grade 2 to sit in a desk in their bubble for a long period of time was not going to be conducive to learning for their developmental stage. So we really had to be creative with how are we going to create a flexible seating environment for students so that they're going to be comfortable, stay engaged, and feel comfortable in the classroom. So we decided to use a mix of tables and chairs, desks and chairs, yoga mats with wobble stools, or yoga mats with chairs on top with clipboards if they wanted to use those for writing services, to give students an option. And that has worked really well for us so far. And now seeing that classroom design, I think if we had gone with our original thought of just filling it with, desks in like a 60s style classroom, that wouldn't have been helpful to our success. So that was just something I wanted to mention when we were talking about classroom design. It took us a while to get to that point of, oh wait, we really have to rethink how we're going to welcome kids back into this environment. But it was very helpful for us to think of that in a flexible way.
That's really great. John, yeah, I was going to ask you, so go ahead. I want to hear what it looks like in your section.
Yeah, I think it's partly in about the collaborative effort and the teamwork, because we involved our custodians quite a bit, and the team that looks after the rooms and the cleaning staff. Everybody has to be involved, right? So if you're going to reset up a room for social distancing and maintain the 1.5 meters, you want to know what that's going to look like, one from a cleaning perspective and one from a teaching and learning perspective. So that was really critical. And outside of the classrooms too, if you think about the cafeteria, how is that going to work? And many cafeterias, I'm sure around the world, have benches with stools or something. So we went and put marks on all the places that you couldn't sit, and then that left the places open for people to do that, and they were all social distancing. And it took a while, I think, for people to realize it, but again, with signage and with constant communication with kids, they start to realize where they can be. In our case, to get outside is really a positive thing. So where we can, we have lots of areas for students to get outside. Maybe even some of the classes could be outside, and we really want to encourage people to get out. So having places set up and set aside for that as well is really important. Using the fields, as Yolanda said, we can't do sport, so we can be out there and just spread out. So we've tried to have as much of outdoor time as we can to help with that. But I think, again, demarking areas which are okay, where can you wear a mask, where don't you need to wear a mask, being outside, if you're socially distant, the masks you don't need to wear. So it's changing some of the behaviors of students, but being very public about it, and giving kids opportunities to give you feedback on, hey, this isn't going to work, and what about this space? Is this okay? again, involving the custodians and other people in the community really made that one everybody's responsibility.
Kathleen, following up on that, do your upper school students move from class to class as they did before, or do the teachers move more? How does that work? Has that had to change?
The students move from class to class, and they have to stay to the right of the hallway, and there's also signage that helps remind students that when they're doing passing time. And I think there's also just been this understanding that, you know, the light is at a certain time, but if you to try to stagger when kids are in the hallway. So some people will let their kids out, 1 or 2 minutes early. Some will hold their students a little bit so that it's not like the mad rush that you would normally see in the hallway. And I just want to get back to like the loud collaboration thing that was mentioned earlier too, that, you know, collaboration, it is difficult. In the sense that they are spaced apart, and if you wanted them working in small groups and talking about stuff, then everybody can hear each other. But I think it's also like one of the things that my students have done is that they're collaborating in the same way they do when they were at home. And so although when you step into the classroom, it might seem really quiet, they're still engaging in conversation with one another about the work that we're doing. So I think collaboration doesn't always have to be loud. Although it makes us feel comfortable, as those of us who teach middle school, we like it loud. But I think it's okay to switch up the way they collaborate as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. We started kind of chatting about some of the details. I'm curious about, you talked a little bit, John, about the canteen or the cafeteria, but what about things like busing and bathrooms? What are the procedures that you've put in place? Yolanda, I know you were at the bus stop yesterday when we spoke.
Yeah. Regarding busing, what we've done is we've staggered drop-off and pickup times. We have our kids here all day at school, so there's just one in the morning and one in the afternoon. The one thing that I think it's important to keep in mind is when John was mentioning this as well, the staffing implications for supporting children 24/7 when they're at school to make sure they are being safe, particularly with younger grades, is significant. So we do have, I would say there's probably at least additional 6 people that we have here for helping monitor what we're calling structured activities. So I wanted to address recess because with the lower grades, that's a concern. What do you do with children during their morning recess, their lunchtime recess? And for the very youngest children, they normally would have at least 3 play times a day. And so we've had to add some staffing for helping ensure that there are structured activities. Kind of the cool thing is that the person that we have doing that has a sign-up sheet. So the teachers have really gotten involved and been quite creative with these structured activity options for children. And the students every Friday get an email. They get to sign up from 2nd grade up through 8th grade. What would they like to learn about this week? And then they do that activity, one activity at recess in the morning and a different activity for their lunch recess. But it's a structured activity, it's monitored, it's usually small groups of around 10 students. And it could be something like meditation. It could be like a step class where they're not jumping around, but they're learning the steps to a dance or something. They have classes in yoga, that's more of a slow yoga. Lots of art classes, graffiti class, Zen tango, and they've been loving it. In fact, it's one of the things that quite a few of the students had said, we want to keep doing this even if when we go back to the normal school day. So I think there's creative ways of meeting the regulations and needs of the children while still kind of enhancing the learning opportunities that they have while they're on campus. The last thing I wanted to add was Grace was mentioning how we help young children in particular be safe when they are doing their collaboration. One of the things that we've put into effect here is that for these structured activities, we've asked all children, and that's pre-K through 8, to bring a beach towel with them with their name on it. And they use that towel if they want to sit on the floor, if they want to collaborate with someone outdoors, they can take it out to sit out in the playground or in the outdoor learning area in the field. And in the very lowest grades, First Steps Primary 1, they even now have categorized activities. So students know if this is a 2-towel activity, that means I can get my towel next to a friend's towel, but we both have to have a mask on when we're collaborating. And if it's a one towel activity, I don't have to have my mask on. I can, you know, get a bin of blocks and go and play over here or do my learning activity alone without a mask. So even the verbiage around that, the littlest ones, the 3 and 4 year olds understand it. And it's just kind of helped with structures for them to know what I can do, what I can't do from a safety perspective when this learning activity comes up.
That's great. Those are great little gems of intel for colleagues who haven't reopened yet. Grace, can you just speak really briefly about bathrooms and what you've done with your bathrooms, please?
Sure. So what you might have seen in the slideshow, we were really for the elementary school was all about how do we make these rules visual for students. It helps them to feel safe and understanding what they're supposed to do. So on top of sinks, we just put red and green circles. So if it's a red circle, it means stop, you can't use the sink. And if it's a green circle, it means yes, you can use the sink. And so by doing that, they're using every second sink and therefore social distancing. And we also made a rule in the elementary school that only one child at a time could leave the classroom to go to the washroom, and then only 2 students at a time in the washrooms. So then in the hallway, we had markers on the floor at 1.5 meters for any time there might be 2 students in the washroom and another one was coming in. They would see, oh, there are 2 students, I need to wait outside, and they could wait at a social distance from each other. And I know that seems really basic, but for our elementary school students, that was really important for them. And interestingly enough, in our communication to students and parents before the return to school, we had lots of open office hours and lots of community sessions of, hey, if you're a grade 3 parent or student, I'll be on Zoom at this time. Please, I invite you to join me for questions. And some of the biggest questions I got was about how they would use the washroom. It was, you know, in every grade level, that seemed to be the #1 question from kiddos. So I think it's worth the thought and planning of how to make that visual for students. #1 concern was, how do I go to the washroom?
That's great. That's great to hear. I'd like to turn it a little bit in our conversation and ask you about how this new normal is affecting you personally and how you're holding up with all of this work and changes. And this is obviously not what anybody signed up for a year ago. How are you handling it, and how do you feel that people are handling all of this emotionally in your community? So I'd like if you could all respond to that one at a time. Anyone feel like starting? Go ahead, Grace.
I would say, you know, our communities handled this very well. I think that we have a strong community of teachers who we're so lucky and they're so competent, and they want to make this work for our students and our families. But that said, it's been hard. You know, it's been really hard on teachers. It's been hard on parents who are at home as our surrogate teachers. You know, that's been a challenge for our community. I think that our teachers have held up very well. But I do wonder what it'll look like next year, you know, after we've had time to process this. I think we've all, in all schools around the world, everyone's just kind of had their head down, and we're charging ahead and getting it done for our communities. And so as a school leader, something that I'm thinking about is, how do we be proactive in supporting our teachers after they've had a summer to process this and after they come back to school next year? After the adrenaline is kind of worn off. And I'm wondering what that will look like, because we have such a strong community that's held up so well, but I think it would be normal to see some faltering in that in the months to come. And one of our challenges as a leadership team will be to be proactive in how we'll support that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Yolanda.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is something that has been at the top of the leadership team here at Wiesbaden's mind since this began, and that is wellness and focusing on supporting parents, students, and teachers with this just extremely high rate of change. I think the other stressor that a lot of people have been dealing with is, even as we were starting to reopen in Germany, the unknowing of when certain kids could come back to school was really weighing on a lot of parents and teachers in particular, because they wanted to, of course, be as well prepared as possible. So one of the things is, in all my communications working with parents and teachers, I've started using my starter, and they know this is based on what I know this minute. And then we would start talking about what we were working on as far as planning. And I think just remembering to use some humor, is important, but wellness is really big. So one of the things we've done is the last few months now, we have we have 90-minute faculty meetings on Wednesdays once a month. We've taken the first 30 minutes of that to do a wellness activity with faculty. And I've had a small team that's just been working on opening up conversations, focusing on solutions thinking, helping people share tips of what's working for them. Specifically when, you know, managing work at both school and a few students on DLP right now at the same time is a bit of juggling. So I think just having everybody also be able to talk with each other and share what is stressful, and then have some of the people that have figured out ways around that share out solutions has been really positive and kind of helped focus people on a solutions mindset for moving forward.
Great. How are some of the rest of you feeling? Go ahead, Anna.
So as far as my class goes personally, we have stayed pretty much the same with routine, which I really think has helped. Keeping something consistent with our workload, our classes, they've all been really steady, which really helps with everything that's changing. And my teachers, they like to check in with us sometimes. They just briefly ask, how are you doing? How are your families doing? And usually we just have a nice discussion at the beginning of each week to make sure everyone's doing all right. And yes, flexibility is definitely something that's very important right now, and the encouragement of that has been very helpful.
Thank you, Anna. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I also want to add that I think that's very, very true what Anna was saying. And also, a lot of people were very scared. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of people were thinking, oh, this is the unknown. Is this going to be bad or is this going to be good? And I think a lot of people should focus more on, instead of thinking that they cannot change something, that, for example, at our school, if something, or if we feel something is not great, we can go and tell people like, hey, the stickers on the seats where we can sit, they, you know, sometimes stick to your pants. So that's something that we can improve. So having this kind of mindset and kind of this community in which we can share things that are bad, I think everyone is going to make the system a lot better. So really keeping that consistent is very good. And also, I think personally, it's gone a lot better than everyone could have thought. And I think that is really testament to how great the community and the staff have been preparing us for this situation.
Thank you. John.
I think the mental well-being piece that was brought up is critical for the adults and the students. I think a lot of teachers, obviously, as you said, didn't sign up for this, and we feel like we're like frontline healthcare workers walking around with masks, and all the kids have to wear masks. And I think from a pedagogy perspective, a lot of us feel like we're newly qualified teachers, that, you know, we go to bed really, really late, and there's all kinds of communication that we have to get through for the next day, and it just gets tiring and tiring. So you can really sense that, I think, with some people. And so the breaks are really welcome. Having the faculty offer some sort of wellness challenges or opportunities. Hey, we're keeping track of here are some activities you can do. Paul does a great job of sending out newsletters or articles, weekly, daily news casts to let people know what's going on and really checking in. Lots of surveys that give us some feedback on where we need to move in other directions. We're fortunate here to have instructional coaches too. So having them check in with some of the faculty on maybe some of the techniques to try. Could be tech coordinators too that can really save a lot of time and de-stress some people by giving, you know, helpful tips and tricks on how to use different platforms in new ways. So I think it's this constant checking in with people, creating space for people to talk. We turned over a couple of faculty meetings just for people to share out how things are going and ideas that you can use to help, just really to get a sense. You know, some social opportunities after school on Fridays. We've done a number of those, and I think they've been well received. Again, optional, but it opens up the opportunity for people to talk and have those discussions and really, you know, unwind a bit and depressurize. So I think those are all really, really important for the health and well-being of the adults across the board.
Mm-hmm. Kathleen, how does it feel from your perspective? You're on the front lines.
I tried to explain this to some of my friends who are in other places as they're anticipating coming back or have just come back as well. And I said, it's a little bit like freshman year, you go home for Christmas and you've had all this independence. You didn't have to tell anyone where you were going. You went to your classes or you didn't go to your classes. You know, that's basically where our kids are at, you know, and they come back to this class and now they have to ask when to go to the bathroom. They can't eat whenever they want. They know how to read directions. So why are you reading them to me? You know, it's that sense of like all this time we've been trying to empower our students to be advocates for their own learning and to be more responsible for themselves. They've been that way. Now they're back in here and we're trying to fit them back into that box that they used to be in. And I think it's anticipating, like, what are the things that really worked for you in distance learning? And don't get rid of those and keep moving forward. And, you know, those times where you were having small group chats and you were able to really get to know where your students were at, where you may not be able to do that in a class of 21 because you're, you know, busy fighting fires. But like trying to find ways to still bring that into your classroom and empower students to do what we want them to do because we know they can do it now. And I think that's been the biggest challenge, is just having all these empowered learners in front of me.
But what an opportunity too. I mean, that's just really powerful to hear you describe it like that. Thank you so much. Paul, I noticed that you unmuted. You want to jump in?
Yeah, just say briefly, I agree with everything that's been said, obviously, but I think like no other time in history is that, you know, the understanding of students, parents, faculty, administrators, staff, in every way, shape, and form, we are so in this together that we cannot, you know, from a mental health perspective, realizing that I think has been just transformational. And that's, I think, a reoccurring message, because at no other time have we, in addition to this whole thing, there's also people have a whole life, that kids that might not go to this school, a sick parent back in another country. You know, you gotta, it's like that book, The Soul Bird, you gotta kind of take that part of your life, close that box, live this life, open that box. And it's just been, you've had to be extremely flexible. And I think Kathleen's point is a good one. You know, it's been so flexible. So how do we maximize that flexibility in a changed educational environment? And also, what things do we need to re-imprint to students that, you know, need to get back into the physical setting? And we've given this option for this period of time, but we can't give this option forever, if you will. So it's a real interesting time. But I would just say this community understanding that we're all in this together, and we need the students to do their part, parents, teachers, me, principals. And when they do, it's an orchestra that we're really proud of.
That's great. Can I ask the group, would you be willing to stay on for a few extra minutes, maybe 10 extra minutes? We can fully wrap this up well. And participants, you're welcome to stay. We still have 887 people who are on, and you know, you're welcome to stay, and the recording will also be available on our website later. Paul, if you don't mind, I'd just like to follow up with one question to you personally, if you don't mind. As we're talking about well-being, there's been a lot of conversation around the world about the role of the head of school and how difficult that has been at this time. Can you think a little bit about what you've learned about leadership this year, and you know, how you're holding up as a head of school with all of this on your plate?
What about, you know, I think, what have I learned? I guess the main thing really has been the communication. I started these videos, I think, just to do a video, but it's really been a comment, you know, there's been a thread through the faculty and staff about what, just different aspects. And, you know, I think they've been pretty authentic. So it's not all rah, rah, this is great, everything's rosy, because it's not. Sometimes it's just sad, terrible, and hard. So I think that's been a real important part. Like, what's different about this, as you know, is just the length of this crisis. You know, I've had some very acute, significant crisis in my career, but then they're over, you know, and then you're moving on from it. But this one is just stayed. So it's really been trying to, you know, hold the community in that crucible, and hope the principals, and they are holding their divisions in their crucible, and the teachers are holding their classroom, and the parents are holding their kid. You know, there's so much of this. So yeah, we're all holding up. We're doing fine. I think everybody's ready for summer. I think everybody does need a break. I mean, a complete break for a little while. But I feel like we're going to be ready for August. So yeah, so I'm like a proud parent, I guess.
That's great. That actually is a perfect segue to what I think will be kind of our last, if you've got to go ahead, Paul. Kind of our last big question for everyone, and it's just thinking about all the schools out there that have not even opened yet, that they've been closed for the rest of this year. What are a few big takeaways that you want people to know? What would you definitely be doing to prepare over the summer? And what advice would you give them as they start to reopen for the first time in potentially August or September? Grace?
I would say, for us, we really knew that one of our goals was to have as many students as possible come back to school. And we knew that there'd be some families who couldn't come back because they had a member of their household in a high-risk category, or maybe their child was in a high-risk category. But other than that group of people, we really wanted everyone back. But we knew how important it was to be sensitive to people's fears. And, if I were to do it all over again, which I will, I guess, in August, with new families who'll be joining us, I would really rely on that communication, and I would not underestimate the importance of having a clearly articulated communication plan and really knowing which audiences you need to target that communication to, what kids need to hear, who they need to hear it from, and how they need to hear it or see it. And then the same thing for parents. I think we talked earlier about making school welcoming and warm to come back to. And that was to say, we talked a lot about students in that regard, but it's also for parents. And, for particularly elementary school or primary school children, parents are the ones who will be deciding if they come back to school. Children will hopefully have some say in that, but really the parent or the guardian is the ultimate decider. And so it's really important when you're thinking about reopening that you take into account what your parent community needs to hear to feel safe to give us their children again. And which is really going through there, what are your health and safety procedures that you've put in place? Do you have a health and safety hygiene book, for example? We've had to develop one to share with our community. What can you show parents to show them what is being done and how seriously your school is taking the safety procedures? Because I think a lot of us, especially if we're parents, can agree, parents want their kids back in school, but they really also want their kids back in school when they feel safe. And so I think if you can show that in your communication, you'll get really good attendance. And I think, what complicates reopening is when you've got some kids who want to attend and a large volume of kids that don't want to, because then you're putting your teachers in a position of delivering a hybrid model of in-person teaching and distance learning, which can really be hard on teachers. So I think if you can get that under control as much as you can with those communication plans, you're going to be setting yourself up for success.
Great. Anna.
So I think that what everyone really needs to remember as students and as teachers is that nothing in this situation is set in stone. It's really going to help with your adaptation, and the way that you perceive what's around you is you have to be flexible, and you have to know that most people don't know what's going on. Not even as students, we've noticed our teachers have no idea what's going on. Everyone needs to be coordinated. It's very difficult. And I think that what's really going to help is people just acknowledging that nothing is positive.
Thank you. Yolanda, you had your hand up earlier, I think.
Sure. A couple of things. This is more for school leaders that are working with their teams and planning for next year. I think there's a couple really important things that we've learned having developed our virtual learning program in 2 days, then finding out we could reopen and have to relook at the schedule to say, okay, how would we now move this back into reopening without having to upset the entire apple cart? So I would say the first thing is, when you start your planning, plan with the end goal in mind. And the end goal for most schools next year is going to have a schedule that can seamlessly change from fully at home to a blended model where maybe students are at school part-time to a full back at school model. And then who knows, maybe in January we have to go back to a blended model or to a full closure again. So it's really important to think about that as a continuum, and how do you structure your staffing, your schedule, everything so that it can flex between those three realities. I think the other piece is to make sure that you're very clear on your goals. What are your goals for the school? What's your educational goals? You know, is it, as Grace mentioned, to get as many students back physically on campus as possible, or is there a different goal in mind? And being very clear about what the goals are, and then making sure that the people that are working on the schedule have those parameters, which are the legal guidelines from the country or the region, your space, square meters or square footage in your classrooms, how many external spaces could you access when you're doing your scheduling? Are field trips an option where students could come in and immediately leave campus? So there's a lot of those pieces that you're going to want to gather that information so that the people working on your schedule have all those pieces of information to make the best schedule possible. And then, of course, your facility staffing schedule all can fit in that. From a curriculum standpoint, though, which surprisingly is sometimes the last thing we're thinking about right now because people are just trying to survive with the regulations coming out. I think it's really important that the curriculum team has time to sit down and they have some time to look at, when you're looking at the learning outcomes for the year for students, you know, how you're almost doing curriculum triage. What are the key buckets that we want to make sure those key learning outcomes and skills that students need to have to be successful in the next grade? Because when you go to full DLP or full virtually online, we know you can't cover everything. So it's really important that faculty and staff know what those are so that they can pull those out and make sure that's in your virtual. And then maybe what are those yellow areas, as I call them? The green areas are the ones that you have to have in the curriculum. The yellow areas are maybe the scaffolded pre-learning that they need for the next grade. And then if there are any areas that are nice, we call that curriculum fluff, but it's not critical, pull those out and just start looking at how that curriculum is being planned for those three modes, for being at school, full-time, in a blended model, or fully at home. Because what you're teaching, for example, in a blended model, which is what we're looking at for next year, is out of those green and yellow areas of the curriculum, what are best suited to be taught online, and those move to your virtual days, and what is best suited to be taught in person at school. And I think it helps being really concrete so your teachers can actually then go through their curriculum and say, okay, now we know kind of what to do for next year. And of course, if you're fully back at school, great. There might still be some of that that you'd want to have students do online, so that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I think there's just the thinking about the curriculum is the other piece that I would just urge people to not forget about.
That's great. That's great. Yolanda, I'm going to just jump in here because I know we're just about out of time, but Michael, you put your hand up real quickly there. Do you want to just say one final thing here before we wrap up? And I've got some important information to share in just a minute. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah. So quick thing, I think communication is key, and also getting as much communication from everyone as possible. So involving the students as much as possible in the changing of the kind of measures that are introduced, because students will experience them in a different way that teachers do. So really including students as much as possible in this is something that is very beneficial.
Michael, that's a perfect segue, because what I was going to say was this last hour or so has been a great example, I think, of the kind of learning that we love to see, which is collaborative, where people are sharing their discoveries, where we recognize as adults that sometimes the 8th graders and the 11th graders have things to tell us, and it's been to teach us. And it's been a lesson, I think, for all of us, participants included. Thank you for all who have sent in their questions and their comments and the links. This is what we mean about lifelong learning. And this is what we mean about being ready to manage the uncertainties of the future. I think, Anna, you said it best. Most people don't know what's going on. And this virtual forum, like the ones before it, have been an attempt to share the best that we can find of what is going on and what's going on in each of our lives. And so for the participants who have been part of this, from Connecticut to Kuwait, from Myanmar to Manchester, from India to Indiana, thank you all for participating. And remember, we're online with NEASC Forum, hashtag NEASC Forum, to share more thoughts and reflections on today's conversation. And a recording of today's conversation, by the way, will be posted on our website very soon. Participants, that is panelists, again, thank you so much for your input today. And best wishes as you bring your school year to a close. Trillium, thank you very much for your moderating today. And again, to our panelists, thank you. And to everybody at NEASC that has made this possible. We look forward to seeing you all again in another virtual forum. My name is Jeff Bradley, and I'm signing off. Thank you.